Hello and welcome to the Rays of Hope program brought to you by the Purchase Area Sexual Assault and Child Advocacy Center. I am your host, Mary Foley, and thank you so much for taking some time to allow me to come into your home and to share with you about our agency, and specifically today about how much we need you. And so with me today is our guest, Lynn Russell, the volunteer director for the center. Welcome, Lynn. Thank you for being a part. If you could just take a moment, introduce yourself to the viewer, and then we'll get right to the important topic today.
Okay, I am Lynn Russell. I'm the volunteer director of the Purchase Area Sexual Assault Center. I'm also the medical unit coordinator for the Child Advocacy Center portion of our center.
So you wear many hats, as
True.
as most people can relate with. And Lynn, I had you on the show today because we are at what we would call a critical level. We are at a critical shortage in terms of volunteers. And you and I were talking before the show about how if there's a blood shortage, the Red Cross and agencies come together and they let people know the urgency of that situation. And we have a very different type of service that we provide, but it is still the life's blood to our victims, that advocacy team. So could you talk to me and talk to the viewer about what does bring you here today? From your perspective, why are things critically low?
We're critically low, I think, due to just in general life changes. So our volunteers, some of them have had to rotate out due to job changes, marriage, going away to college, graduating from college, different things like that. So we have found ourselves, like you said, critically low, especially on our crisis line, which for a lot of people that is, I want to say lifeline, but when they've been through this experience, whether it's just happened recently or if it happened 20 years ago and something has triggered it, they're on the phone, they need their questions answered, they need somebody to reach out to, even if it's just to listen to them. And that is a need there. We also need with our medical advocacy, because that is often a first contact.
Well, you talk about crisis line and medical advocacy, and you and I know what those terms mean. So let's take a moment just to step back and talk about what are the primary ways people do volunteer, and could you explain each of those components?
Okay, our crisis line is, we have a 24-hour crisis line. Our volunteers go through the training, and they're able to take those calls most often during the night, but you're not on the phone for hours, you're not at a call center. Those calls come into your home, your privacy is protected, but when those calls come in, we train the volunteers to be able to take those and to initiate something within 25 minutes to 30 minutes at the most. And they're there to answer questions, help them to get an action plan, to even if it's just giving them the number of the center for the next day to call for a therapy appointment.
Okay, and so there's an answering service that answers the phone for our center after hours, and if there's a crisis call, then there's a on-call schedule, and that call is patched through to that volunteer. It's patched through to the volunteer.
The volunteer's privacy is protected.
Okay.
There's no personal information given out on the volunteer. On the call, the volunteer can give them their first name if they'd like to, just as part of the conversation to kind of establish a relationship there.
Okay, so the crisis line is what you said is right now the most critically low.
It's the most critical, yes.
That we have. And so why is it, other than the obvious that someone is in crisis and needs a connection, what is the benefit of having somebody on the other end of that phone for that person in that moment?
Often that sometimes is the first contact that a victim has, and that can enhance the healing time or it can hinder it depending on how they're treated in that phone call. Same way at the hospital. But that call is often their first contact, their first disclosure, and how that disclosure is met can make a big difference in how that person copes with it.
I see. And you know, it's one of the benefits of the crisis line is that the caller can't see the advocate can't see the caller, and there's a level of safety in that for the caller.
Right.
Sometimes we have folks that call the crisis line and still are not ready to come into the center, but they will use that crisis line to warm up to the idea of actually engaging in the treatment process.
Yeah, I think they're just trying to find out, is there somebody out there that will believe them? Somebody that cares enough to talk with them. But a big part of it is, will I be believed?
I see.
I think it's a major reason that they take their time and call the crisis line to warm up to it.
Sure. And then you talked about a medical volunteer or a medical advocate. What does that mean?
A medical advocate is basically, sometimes we'll call them hospital volunteers. They actually get the call from the same answering service. They get up and go meet that victim at the hospital with law enforcement, and if it's a child, of course, with social services. But they're there as an advocate on behalf of that victim, because a lot of times they may not have family with them, or they may not want their families called. And you're there basically as their support, their family, so to speak, and to make sure that they know they're believed and that they do care and that they're getting the right care.
I see. So, Lynn, I think a very valuable point to make at this point to the viewer that people just may not be aware of is that the state of Kentucky makes a place in the law, in the statute, for a rape crisis or child advocacy center advocate. So hospitals are aware that if a victim comes in, that by law they are required to notify that victim that an advocate can be called. And so I think that's an important point to clarify, because the victim's not going to the hospital, picking up the phone and calling. The medical personnel is saying, would you like for me to call someone? And when they say yes, then really the burden is sitting on us and the community to respond.
To make sure there's an advocate there on behalf of that client.
So if I'm listening to this for the first time, I might think, what am I going to walk into when I get to that hospital? What am I going to see? What would be your answer to some of those misconceptions?
Often, there's no two cases are the same, of course. When you walk in, oftentimes you'll find someone that's scared to death. The law enforcement's there, and they have to ask their questions, which are sometimes pretty intense, whether they mean for them to be or not. It just comes across that way because they have to have all the information, all the facts.
In a different role.
In a different role, right. So you're there a lot of times to answer those questions, not to answer questions for her, but to help her understand the whys and why they need to know. So sometimes you're there with a client that's scared, sometimes a client is angry. So you're there for all kinds of situations, so you may walk into just a different scene every time.
And so how do you prepare just common people like you and me to walk into something like that? How are they prepared?
A state-mandated 40-hour required training. We do 20 of that with an at-home study manual, and then also 20 of it in sessions at the center. Those usually sessions that I try to do a group. We work it around work schedules, so they're after hours, or usually after 5. We do the manual I'll give ahead of time after the application process, and they will just work through that and then come in for the sessions. Once they are completed, then they're qualified to be on the schedule.
Well, and you mentioned once that initial application process is completed, and so the viewer just saw on the screen some of the requirements to be a volunteer. So what are those basic requirements before you can even take them through the training?
The basic requirements are they must be at least 20 years old, pass a background check and a criminal background check, complete the required 40-hour training. Once they're trained, which, like I said, is the 20 hours with the at-home study manual, the 20 hours in session with me, then they are put on the schedule. We work around work schedules, we work around family schedules, we work around school schedules. A lot of times our volunteers will do a week at a time, but if a volunteer can only do 2 days a month, we work from that.
I see. So basically they are in charge of what works for them, and we'll make sure they have the tools necessary to meet the various situations.
And I have a lot, an open door policy. If there's a problem with the schedule, if they can't do it that month or whatever, they just need to let me know, and we will work around that.
Lynn, we oftentimes assume that it's a female victim at the hospital, but you and I both know all too well there have been times when we have arrived at the hospital for a male victim. So what would you say to the men that are watching?
We can always use male volunteers on the crisis line, especially because sometimes we do get male callers and they feel more comfortable talking with another male. Or sometimes at the hospital, our female volunteers, they go in, they will work with them, but sometimes for their own comfort level, a male volunteer would be great to have.
I'll tell you of a specific example, Lynn, that comes to mind immediately. I got a call. There weren't enough volunteers to do what we call the front line, meaning that we went to a staff member. The call came through to a staff member, and I went to an area hospital, and it was a male. And my first thought was, I'm a little uncomfortable, and I'm certain that he is a little uncomfortable. And as we worked through all of that, it ended up being, I think, exactly as it should have been. It was fine, but I so wish that we had had a man that we could have patched that call through for that victim's comfort level.
Right.
What do you do if a man is a volunteer and a female does not want to speak with a man? How would you handle that?
If it's a female and she doesn't want to speak with the man, then he has usually other volunteers that he would call tag teaming. He can contact them and put that female in contact with a female volunteer.
Okay.
We're also working too, another need that just crossed my mind is Spanish-speaking volunteer. We have not had a lot of calls on that yet, but we would love to have someone that would be bilingual
to be able to address
to cover
those
that
needs.
issue
We are a
if it
regional
comes up.
center, so we cover the 8-county purchase area, and certain counties have a
We
more.
cover a lot of rural areas, so a lot of times we do have Spanish-speaking folks, and to have someone bilingual would be a great asset.
Absolutely. Lynn, we don't have a lot of time left in this portion of the program, and in just a few moments we're going to be speaking with a volunteer that you know very well that's been with the center for a long time and get her take on her experiences. But one of the other components that I want to make sure that you cover is we are also a child advocacy center, and so some people may have what we would say a heart for children. What is the volunteer's role when it's a child?
When it's a child, if they are at the hospital, they are there basically in support of social services. They're on behalf of that child. They're with the child while all the other uproar is going on around them. So they're there for that child.
So they're the calm and that
the
constant.
calm and the peace for that little one. They're kind of the support and somebody for the child to just talk to while everything else is going on.
And we do work very closely with law enforcement and social services,
Yes.
and want to take an opportunity to say what a wonderful job that those agencies do in support of our community's victims. Finally, before we close, what if someone is listening and they say, you know what, I don't want to be called to court. I don't want to be involved in a big battle of some sort of, if it were to come that way, what would you say?
Our volunteers are protected through Privacy Act and things like that. They will not be called into court.
Okay.
That is strictly with law enforcement and social services.
So they're not an
area.
investigator.
They are not an investigator. That is not the role of any of our volunteers, even on the hospital calls. But especially in child advocacy, they are there as a support role.
Okay, so their communication with the victim is protected communication.
Yes.
Okay. Any final thoughts that you would like to say to folks? How do they call you? How do they get in touch with you?
Well, our number was put up on the screen, but we can call me or email me at the center, and I would love to talk with them about it and sit down and see how we can meet their needs and they can meet ours.
Okay.
And there's a definite need. The biggest part is if you've got a heart for children or for people in need, we can use you.
Well, Lynn, thank you so much. And the number is on the screen, 270-534-4422. And you can call Lynn Russell and volunteer to create change and provide hope to those that are in need. Thank you so much for giving us your time today. And thank you so much for staying with us for the first portion of this program. We're going to take just a quick break. We will be back in just a few moments. Welcome back to the Rays of Hope program. I'm your host today, Mary Foley, and we've been talking about volunteerism and the importance of volunteers to the Purchase Area Sexual Assault and Child Advocacy Center. And if you're just now joining us, we have Connie with us. She is a PASAC volunteer, so welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Connie, the reason why I'm so excited about having you on the show is it's one thing for me to interview one of our staff members about volunteering and why it's important and why we need people to come on board. And it's a very different thing for me to be able to sit down face to face with someone who has agreed to give of their time and talent to assist those in need. And so it's an honor to sit with you today. Connie, just talk to us about why or how did you come to be a volunteer for the Purchase Area Sexual Assault Center?
Well, I've always volunteered, I guess, just about all my life. Brought my 3 children up to be with me when I done my volunteer and charity work. So they've grown up that way too, and they do some charity work too. But in this program, I have a granddaughter, and I have a daughter, and I have several nieces and nephews too. And it just it's just something that I felt that, you know, I could do, so, you know, that I should do.
And you know, I think, Connie, if we could probably just end the segment right there. It's something that I could do, and so it's something that I should do. And I think many times in our lives there's a lot of things we can do, but maybe we shouldn't do them. But then there are those things that we can do and we should do, and you felt that call, and you answered that. You've been with us for how many years?
Going on 9, I believe.
Going on 9 years. So you to talk to the viewer about what capacities that you volunteer in with our center. What do you do for us?
Well, I do the telephone, and I also do the hospital.
Okay. And so what has that been like?
Well, I'm not saying it's the easiest thing I ever did, but there's been some cases that, you know, that really hurt, like, you know, the children. But I just feel like that if I can do just for one person, if all I had to do was to listen to them, or to sit at the hospital with them, or just hold their hand or give them a hug, then my life has been enhanced. Because I feel like really all it is it's like an exchange of heart.
Yes.
I'm getting something from them, and I hope I'm giving something to them.
And so, Connie, is there a specific time, maybe obviously not a specific case that we would discuss, but a specific time where you felt that exchange more than others, where you did feel like you really connected with that client or that victim?
Yes. One young girl, and I mean, she's 30, something like that. I walked into the hospital, and I could tell that you could see the physical damage. But she had nobody there with her. And when I walked in, they knew that I was coming, you know, she knew who I was representing. She just hugged me and wanted me to hold her.
Wow.
And so I stood like that for a long time. And I mean, you know, that's all I did for her. She had nobody else.
And Connie, I think so many times, as you know, we find that to be the case. Maybe the victim is not from the area, or the victim is from the area in school and their family lives elsewhere, or their immediate family is out of town, or maybe they don't want their family to know. And so there they are, very much in the true sense of the word, feel very alone. And you are then able to come in and be that support. For viewers that are watching that may be thinking, oh, I could never, ever deal with this topic, what would you say to them?
I would say that there is training.
Okay.
There is training. And there's always somebody. And if there's ever a situation you didn't think that you could handle, you always have Lynn or the other ones at the office that could be there to help you. And there's always something. There's something that you could do.
Between the crisis line and the hospital services that you provide, is there one that you enjoy more than the other, or are they equally enjoyable to you?
Well, both of them I think gives an experience. I would have a hard time deciding which one I wouldn't want to do.
Well, obviously, you've been doing it for almost 9 years, so there's something very rewarding about it for you.
Yes, it is.
So, could you help the viewer understand how it works when you get a crisis call? What does that mean? What happens?
Well, you take the call and you ask them, if they're okay right now, if there's something, what is it that is really, bothering them right now? Because usually it's something that has already happened. But if it's not, then you go a different route. But when you listen to them and you encourage them to come to the office for the counseling, and you tell them, some things at the office, that it is free, they don't have to worry about that. And
so you're putting information into their hands for them to make those decisions.
And you have to tell them that, like, I know you don't want to go right now because they've told me that I don't want to do that now. I don't think I can. Then I asked them to think about it, because it will come back to them, years down the road. So just try to do it now.
So you're there to really encourage them to connect with those more long-term services, rather than just continue to use that crisis line to get to a long-term connection with the center. So really you are a first responder, so to speak. You are the front line for the agency. And then for those that do have been assaulted in a way where there's physical harm and they do have to go to the hospital, what is that process like? From the time you get the call, what happens?
Well, we're not usually on both of them at the same time, but I have had occasions where I was just on the phone, and I told her I would call someone to come to the hospital, and she had already been talking with me, so they have asked me, well, could you go with me? And I will go instead of calling the one that's on the hospital.
Okay, so you're saying you've been on call for the crisis line, and that victim was going to go to the hospital, and so rather than sending the on-call advocate, you went ahead and went.
Yes, because she asked me to.
Okay. And Connie, just from your perspective, why do you think that connection with that volunteer is so important for that victim?
Oh, it's hard to explain. Because I've never been in their shoes, but I've seen their hurt, I've seen their loneliness, I've seen their scared. They're scared. And to know that someone is standing there by their bedside that does know about it, I'm hoping that will make them just feel a little bit more safer and at ease.
Of course. And and as a volunteer, you are trained to assess their safety, and you all are equipped on how to make a mandatory report, and you do know how to connect them with other resources or to address needs that may be in addition to the assault. What role does the advocate play for the family members of that victim? If you've got a victim in the hospital, but then you've got an angry dad or an angry mom, or you've got some sort of family dynamic, what role do you play in that situation?
Well, you have to try to calm them down. But because they've never been through that before either, and you've had your training, and you know how to talk to them, and you know how to explain the things that is going to happen and why they need to do it, and that there'll be questions and everything that we're going to help them with, because they're going through a bad time too.
Well, you're exactly right, and I think many times we in the field or in this work focus so much on what we would call the primary victim, or the one that has had the incident or abuse or assault occur to them, that many times we don't talk as much about the secondary victims, which are the family, the mom, the dad, the brother, the sister, the aunt, the uncle, the caretaker, that is left to deal with the effect that this has on them, and what an important role that volunteer serves for the family. When you have been in that more of that family advocate role, What about that is rewarding for you?
Well, it's some of the same thing that I know that I am helping them to understand what they don't understand yet, and what they're going to go through too.
Sure. Do you feel like when folks hear about the center and the services and the fact that they're free and that they're confidential and that there are experts there to help them deal with this issue, do you find that folks that's new information to them, that they didn't know that help was available and may not have reached that help if it weren't for the volunteer?
Oh yes, I'd say most of mine cases I had, they didn't know, didn't know that we even had that. And
so because of those volunteers, they do know, and they're able to plug in with that assistance. Connie, you mentioned that, I want to go back to something that you said at the very beginning, because I think that's a real key. You talked about how you made giving to others or volunteering your time important and a lesson that you taught your children. That it was something that not only did you tell them, but that you modeled for them. You didn't tell them to volunteer, you volunteered to show them. What would you say to viewers who have just happened upon this program and maybe have it on while they're cooking supper or while they're doing other things, and maybe they hadn't really thought about the importance of instilling that value in their children? What would you say to them?
Well, I think I would say something like, I know you're busy. Everybody's busy. Everybody's got more than they can do. But if you want to do something that even for yourself, and you know you're doing it for yourself, but you're also helping somebody else, then give it a try.
Right.
It will make you feel better.
Thank you so much for coming on the program today, and I would like to publicly thank you for your work that you do on behalf of victims and their families here in the Purchase area. There's a lot to be said for longevity with volunteers, so the fact that you've been with us almost 9 years, I thank you for your service to us.
You're welcome.
And I thank you, the viewer, for joining us for another edition of the Rays of Hope program, brought to you by the Purchase Area Sexual Assault and Child Advocacy Center. I hope that you will give us a call and see how you can plug in and be a part of the solution.